Welcome to the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, your guide to motorsports sponsorship. Here's your host, Josh Weesey.
Welcome to this episode of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, which is powered by AMSOIL. Today is a special show. I am doing a solo show here. It's something I've been doing a little bit more of recently because I have learned a lot over the past 2+ years in doing the show. Guests have transferred a lot of knowledge to me, and there's a few things that just are on my mind. And sometimes the audience members ask me questions, and I'm like, man, I just need to spend some time answering that. So today I'm answering a question that's come up a number of times, and it's something that I've definitely thought of before, and that is, how do you get sponsored if you're not a racer? And I am dubbing this one the Weekend Warrior podcast because that's kind of my definition. But before I get into the show, there's a few things I want to talk about with you. One is AMSOIL. Now, specifically, I want to talk about the 4-stroke snowmobile oil this time. So I am running that in my sled this year. Now, last year I had just bought the sled and I ran, whatever came in it from the factory, and I have definitely noticed a little bit smoother performance this year. I got to run it in minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, which for your Canadians up there, you're like, oh, hey there, that's just like a Tuesday here. I don't know if that's a Canadian accent or not, but either way, it was cold and thing fired up, ran smooth. I've been very happy with AMSOIL products for a long time now. I've got nothing but positive things to say about AMSOIL. I got their stickers that I'm running all over the place. I proudly run their stickers on things. Even my old lawn tractor, I had an AMSOIL sticker on that. So, it's good company, good people, good products. So I encourage you to check them out, amsoil.com/rider. Moving on here, I have to encourage you, head over to iTunes and leave the rating and review because it is huge for the show. Huge for the show. Please do that for me. I would really appreciate it. And beyond that, hit subscribe. That way you don't miss upcoming episodes. Beyond that, I need to tell you a little bit about the other sponsors for this podcast. SolderWeld, they produce game-changing metal bonding technology. TopThePodium.com, they're experts in motorsport sponsorship. Bold Racing, they're a family race team and GSP XTV axle specialist. And then Crash Addict Industries, they provide human protection and extreme racing products. I also want to shout out some of our other partners, MBRP, HMK USA, Studboy Traction, and GSP XTV. Without further ado, let's hop in. For a while now, I've been wanting to do a show about the people that don't race, specifically focus on them, the people who are never planning to race, but they still want to get in this whole sponsorship game. I call them the Weekend Warriors. So that's what this show is called. It's the Weekend Warrior podcast. I have gotten a lot of questions over the past couple of years since doing the show. People say, how do I get sponsored if I don't race? And there's actually a lot of examples out there of people who have done this. Now, I cannot tell you that it's easy. You would have to pretty much put in the same amount of work as a racer puts in, just in different ways. But it is possible. There's plenty of examples out there, like I said. I want to use this episode to talk more about it. I want to answer that question as best as I can. I might refer you back to a couple of other older podcasts in the process where we've kind of touched on it. But, it's as simple as saying yes. The answer to that question, can I get sponsors without being a racer? The answer is yes. It's going to take more than that to explain it, though. And it is not easy to do. But in the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about what it really means to do it, give you some examples of how to do it, maybe some people who have done it, and ultimately what the limitations are, because there are limitations to that strategy. But either way, the Weekend Warrior, I guess I'll just tell you a little bit more about my definition of what the Weekend Warrior is. This is somebody who, through the week, maybe they have a job and over the weekend they really like to ride their dirt bike, or they really like to, get their ATV out, and maybe they like to do some, overlanding. I don't know. Maybe they just like to drive their Jeep around. Whatever it is, it's the weekend warrior where this is not the only thing they do, and, they're not a professional racer, but this is what they want to do. They want to have fun in motorsports, and they want to share their story and ultimately, either make some money out of it or get some significant product discounts out of it. Either way, they want to gather a product sponsorship. Like I said before, there are a number of examples of this, and we did touch on this before with Evan Schendel. We talked about this a little bit in his episode. I think it was the live one where we touched on it. I actually went back and just looked up here quickly from my website. Looks like on episode 132, that's when Evan came on and answered a bunch of audience questions. I'm pretty sure one of them on there was talking about this exact concept. So you can always go back and listen to that show too. But I mean, actually in that show too, we talked about this. Trail Recon, Brad Kowitz, he does this. He has some active sponsors, but he is not a racer. He is a Jeep enthusiast. He's a content creator, but not a racer. Thomas Affelt, he was on episode 48 of the show. He runs a successful Instagram account, and he turned that into a little business, and he's attracted and retained sponsors. Honestly, most of the backcountry athletes that are on the show, so a lot of sledders, they do not race professionally. Now, a number of them do. There's a number of people who've been on this show that do some sort of hill cross or hill climb or, snow cross racing, but there's a number of backcountry sledders that don't. And actually some of them have been able to make it work as a full-time gig, but it's incredibly difficult, but they have done it. So there's plenty of examples out there. Jake Coleman from the Dirty Dooner Show, he's been able to do it with his podcast. He's not a racer, but he loves motorsports and he loves creating great content. So he's been able to lock that down too. Pretty much every single model you see on Instagram, I mean, male or female, they've got all these swipe up stories of all these different types of products that you can get discounts on, or, that's pretty much paid advertising for them. There's a lot of examples on Instagram. It's actually funny, I do this podcast that's focused on motorsports marketing and sponsorship, but if you look out into the world and just influencer marketing, there's just some crazy examples out there. But I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, isn't what they're doing the same thing as what all these models on Instagram are doing? Like, yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But either way, more examples, like this might give you an excuse to go on Instagram and look at all different models out there and just see what they're doing, how they've built a social media following, and how they are actually driving sales for their sponsors. But they all have something in common. They all have something to market, and they're all content creators. Every one of them, even the racers out there. Vipe Desai, who was on this show a little while back, him and I talked about like the additional stresses on athletes of the present day, and social media and content creation is an additional stress. Racers can't just race anymore in order to attract the big sponsors and retain the big sponsors. They have to have social media followings, they have to have great content, they have to have a story to tell. So as content creators, and as someone who is not a racer but the weekend warrior, you just have to take all that stuff to the next level. And we actually are going to talk a little bit more about that too in a minute, because there's some limitations that come along with the whole weekend warrior concept. But before we get to those limitations, I want to get you thinking about how to do it. Now, some of these things we're going to talk about are pretty straightforward, and we dedicate a lot of time on the show to it. But it's worth mentioning again, especially if you're listening to this show and you've never listened to any other one. You may have just been attracted to the title, like how to get sponsored, as a weekend warrior. That may have intrigued you. So I'll tell you a couple of things here. First and foremost, probably the most obvious one, social media. And when I mean social media, I mean like for real social media. Intense dedication. Going back to Thomas Affelt's episode 48, he said he spends like 6 to 7 hours on Instagram a day. I mean, that's crazy, but like it's a job. So it is legit. It's serious. 4x4 Barbie, she's been on the show like 4 times now. And although she is a racer now, and she used to do monster trucks that, raced monster trucks when she was first getting started, she still has a huge investment of time and energy into curating her Instagram content. And as a result, she's gotten a ton of followers. Amy Hood was just on the show, episode 137, and she was also on 7. Huge Instagram following. But she puts a lot of thought and effort into it. Curating, I picked that word on purpose. Curating content is pretty essential. If you look at some of the really popular Instagram accounts or even Facebook, do not look at mine because, look, I can tell you what to do, but I have not figured out all the details myself. But, that's why I bring guests on the show all the time to have them tell you what to do because they actually figured it out. But, you look at some of these amazing Instagram walls or profiles and you see this like curated content. You scroll to the page and like, wow, this all makes sense. Like it flows. I want to look at the page. That takes effort. That takes thought. That takes strategy. When you talk to some of the backcountry sledders out there who have come up with fantastic Instagrams and fantastic, Facebook pages, they'll take pictures, during a season and save them up and curate them to last the entire year so that in the summer they can still, get people excited about snowmobiling and backcountry riding. So like you have to really truly invest in social media to make the whole weekend warrior concept work. Now, keeping with the social media theme, I gotta talk more about, video, and specifically video on YouTube, and then we'll talk about Facebook Live. But creating good content on YouTube is very difficult to do nowadays. I mean, honestly, there's just so many options out there. It's pretty incredible, but there's still ways that if you can create, either entertaining or informational, or best yet both, content on YouTube and truly stick in there for consistent great content, like it is possible to do the weekend warrior concept on YouTube. Going back to Trail Recon and Brad Kowitz, he's got a very popular YouTube channel. Sally McNulty, who is on here, she's a time attack driver. She was on a number of episodes ago. Actually, I'm going to look that up real quick. She was on episode 82. So Sally did the same thing. She did all these great videos on YouTube, and it's really entertaining, really good quality stuff. But it takes a long time to build a strong YouTube channel. I mean, okay, don't get me wrong. There are outliers out there. There's people who have created viral content and blew up as a result. It can happen, but the odds are lower. They're actually very low for that to happen. If anybody doesn't believe me, pick up one of Gary Vaynerchuk's books, and he talks about how all these people out there, they try, and then for 2 years they got nothing, 5 viewers, 10 viewers, and then all of a sudden they have this hit, and that appears as like, the thing that got it all started. But really, it was years worth of effort to get there. But yeah, don't get me wrong, there can be viral videos that really take a career off. Larry Enticer is a perfect example of that. Larry created this crazy video. He jumps as Enticer. It's pretty ridiculous, but it went viral. He leveraged it. He did a great job leveraging that exposure, and he made something of it. Sean Whittycomb, who was on the show in the past, he had a viral video. He took advantage of it. Now he's got a great following. But I don't know if I can use Sean in this, though, because he is a racer. But Larry would be another example, actually, of the weekend warrior. Although he did a little bit of motocross, but I don't know, sometimes these lines get a little blurry. But, Larry is not a professional racer. He tools around on his stuff, and he makes content that his followers really, really enjoy. So I'm gonna make sure that stays here. That's still valid. It's still Weekend Warrior, the way I define it at least. Um, but yeah, the YouTube content. I mean, how-to videos are a really strong go-to option for YouTube. Another one is product reviews. That's a big thing for sponsors to look for. Someone who can actively review and give objective feedback on their product to an audience. That's a pretty popular one. I know that Greg Thomas, who was on the show Muddy Microphone, he's done a number of product reviews for companies as well, which is really cool. It's definitely a good option. Honestly, I've done some. If you look at some of the content I've created, I've done some product reviews as well through my personal YouTube channel. And like I said before, I want to talk about Facebook video, Facebook Live. I mean, with the invention of Facebook Watch and just the way that Facebook has pushed video, in general, you can create content on YouTube and it also be very well accepted on Facebook. So there's an option to run two platforms there. So from a Weekend Warrior standpoint, if you can create really good video content, there's probably some good logic to releasing it on both Facebook and on YouTube. You might get a little bit different target audiences. With Facebook, it's really easy to boost posts and things like that if you have a page, but they're both really hard to get followers on nowadays. So it is something that you can definitely explore, and it can definitely bring value to any Weekend Warrior that really puts the time into making it work. But both of them allow for live streaming too, and there's other platforms that do the same. I've taken advantage of Facebook Live. I think it's a cool way to engage with the audience and engage with another guest live at the same time, give you a little bit more of that raw, uncut feeling. Unlike this show, right? I've done some editing with this show, and I prefer that for my regular podcast. I would consider this one of my standard production podcasts. But for the Facebook Lives, I do not go back through and edit when I release it, to my general podcast audience. I kind of want it to keep that raw feeling, and that's just another avenue, another venue for the Weekend Warrior to share their experience. I mean, if you can get out somewhere that you're riding, even if it's a small track you're playing on or a cool trail you found or a mud pit, whatever it is, if you can get service there and then do a Facebook Live from that location, and maybe you're running some new set of tires from a sponsor, like I don't know, it can give you a pretty cool way to engage with your followers. So let's say we'll go back to the mud hole example. Let's say you just got a pair of BF Goodrich mud terrain tires on your Jeep, and you're like, your Jeep's all muddy, and you look back and you've conquered a mud pit. You go live, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this pit, I can't believe it, I just made it through this. What do you think? What's the biggest pit you guys have gone through? I don't think I could have gotten through without my tires. Like, check these things out. Look, there's hardly any mud clumped in them, and I just went through this, all live, unscripted. It can be a pretty genuine way for you to promote a sponsor and still be the Weekend Warrior. And I think that you've got to take advantage of these sorts of things if you want to try it. If you want to do the Weekend Warrior, become the influencer marketing, get sponsors without being a racer, I think you got to pay attention to these things on social media. The video, whether it's live or edited, it's got to be good quality content. I wish I could tell you the specifics about what type of video and what type of content you're going to do or how you're going to market it or what your niche is going to be. I just wish I could, but if I knew it, I'd probably do it myself as well. But you got to figure it out for you. You've got to take your own personality and put it into those different avenues. I mean, even for me, the way that I've kind of done it, I took my own personality, which was, kind of business oriented, not a racer, so I guess I kind of fall into the weekend warrior piece too. Um, and I created some content this show that I felt spoke to who I am more. And here we are, 138 episodes later, and I'm still doing it. But yeah, so either way, just to hammer this point home, you gotta get into social media to be a weekend warrior sponsored. You gotta get into some sort of, content creation. Just like I said, YouTube, Facebook, those are very popular platforms for video. But while we're kind of on the example of me, let's talk about podcasting. Podcasting is a pretty popular platform right now, but honestly, it's been around for quite some time, and even for me getting in the game in a late 2016, I mean, I was late to the game. There are a lot of players in the podcasting world, but it is still a great platform because you can get a message across, you can get listeners, you can get followers, without them having to be locked onto a screen. So they can do it while they're running, they can do it while they're driving. I think a lot of people listen to this show while they're driving, just based on the feedback I've gotten. You can do it if you have a desk job and you can listen to music or podcasts at work. Like, it's a great way to reach those types of people. So there are definitely options if you're going to be a weekend warrior where you can do podcasting or some sort of other audio production, and you can gain followers, you can gain sponsors as a result. I am a good example of this, as I've been doing this show now for quite some time, and I was very fortunate very early on, quite unexpectedly. Jeff Vanestal of TopThePodium.com reached out to me. I was around, within my first 6 episodes, and said, "Hey, I would like to sponsor your show." And as of today, I've had a number of amazing people support the show. But outside of that, I've been able to attract product sponsors as well. So I am probably, the more I think about it, I'm a good example of the weekend warrior that also is sponsored. I do not race. I have never raced other than a time trial event that I did randomly and won. No big deal. Although I was one of 2 people in my class. But that's beside the point. I won the race. But either way, I've been able to attract some great product sponsors. I've been with HMK now for a year and a half, maybe, about a year and a half. I have been with Studboy Traction for about the same amount of time. I have been with MBRP for even longer than that. Ever since I got my Polaris RZR 1000, I've been with MBRP for both my truck and for the RZR, actually, and also for my snowmobile. So lots of exposure with MBRP. With my Polaris RZR, I was with One Stop Performance for some fantastic metal work, essentially a roofing. Crash Addict Industries, they provided some amazing bumpers on my Polaris RZR, and they are still huge supporters of this show too. And I was with Leaders RPM, a discount on my Polaris RZR, which was phenomenal as well. With the show, Bold Racing has been there for a long time. Neverlift Racing, Armor Coat, Mind FX Science, obviously AMSOIL, and then SolderWeld. They're a big supporter of the show, have been for a long time now. Man, it's so crazy once you start thinking about this stuff, how time flies. But yeah, I mean, SolderWeld for a long time now. It's just that my point here is that I made it work, and I did it through the platform that I connected with best, which was the podcast platform. It was something that fit my personality. It was something that I could do within my schedule, meaning I could do it at night. I could do it remotely, where I could call people and engage with them that way. It was something that I was technically capable of learning. I could afford the investment in the equipment, but all of this, just like the other examples I gave, requires a ton of work. Right now I'm recording this show, and I don't get much sleep. There's no secret there. I have a hard time keeping up with the show and day job and kids and stuff like that. But just like everyone out there, I'm busy. But it's doing something I feel that I need to do. It's a message that I feel I need to get out there. And the hard work has paid off in the sense that I have amazing supporters for the show. And you've seen it with other motorsports podcasts. I mentioned Jake Coleman of the Dirty Dooner Show earlier. He's been able to get some amazing sponsorship out of the show, rightfully so. He's got a great following, great show. The Diesel Podcast, the folks over there have, a crew that they've built up, and, they've got a really good thing going with the Diesel Podcast, even connecting with AMSOIL like I have with this show. It's a great way to get your message out there. You have to have content that people want to hear, whether it's just pure entertainment or whether it's also informational. Either way, as long as it is something that people want to hear, then there is a good opportunity for you to take your Weekend Warrior, project and turn it into an actual sponsorship. Okay, I think you got the point there with podcasting, though. Now I want to move on to another element, which is events. We've talked about events with a number of people, actually. Going back to episode 34, we had Jess Klein on of Backwoods Promotion. Now, she was also on 105 at Heydays, but I want to direct you back to episode 34. And we talked about how to prep for an event. And, even with Vipe Desai, when he was recently on, we talked about, the elements of an event and what promotion looks like. It is a fantastic avenue for you to attract and retain a sponsor. Brandon Tedizzle Cox, he does this as well. But if you can generate, a big crowd, that is an option for sponsors to come on board. Now, a lot of times if you have a big enough event, you're going to need sponsors anyways to pay for it, unless you're just naturally wealthy. But most people listen to the show not because they're naturally wealthy. Most of the people listen to the show because they're trying to figure out how to afford to do the things they love, without completely breaking the bank. But this is just a way to think about how you can pull more eyeballs into one general area, and then you can get a title sponsor or different levels of sponsors on board to help support the event. But you may be able to get it to a point where, it's revenue generating as well. If not, maybe you don't need that. Maybe that's not your goal. Maybe your goal is to just put the event on and you don't know how to fund it. Well, get the plan in place, get enough people on board ahead of time, or prove it out over a series of smaller events that eventually grow to the size that you feel is going to add a return on investment for a potential sponsor. But get to that point, pitch it to your target sponsor, whoever that may be, and there it is. I have not personally put on events. They kind of terrify me. Maybe I should one day, just because people grow fastest in areas of discomfort. But either way, I don't know. Haven't done it yet. A little terrified. I don't think I have good skill set for that sort of stuff. That's right now why I'm sticking to podcasting. But either way, some people are good at these things, and they can get a large amount of people to commit to going to one place at one time, and they can get all the details lined up. If you have that talent, that is an option on how to be a weekend warrior and yet still attract and retain sponsors. All right. A lot of what we just talked about is the good things, lots of good options. And we're going to talk next about some things that you're going to have to overcome, though. But right before that, I'd like to take a minute to thank the sponsors for this podcast.
What's up, everyone? This is Mike Pasquarella, founder of Desert Vets Racing. When the team goes racing, we always have our SolderWeld products with us. Keeping the cars in the fight is our number one concern. With SolderWeld, we can do that. SolderWeld is a leading company in the U.S. for aluminum repair. They specialize in radiator repair on the fly. If you're stuck in the middle of the trail or a race with a hole in your radiator, oil pan, or canister, or even an aluminum line, you can fix it right then and there in a matter of minutes with their AMSOIL aluminum repair rods and flux. It's the only complete and lasting fix in the off-road community. SolderWeld's new UTV off-road kits fit in every ride and are easy to access on the fly.
SolderWeld continues to make a huge positive impact on this industry. So I really encourage you, get in there now. Go to solderweld.us, check out their products, because this stuff is changing the game. Two questions I get continuously about this show and about sponsorship is, do I need my own website and do I need a resume? The answer is, in my opinion, yes to both, and that's why we partner with TopThePodium.com. Now, if you want to see an example of what a professional website and what a professional resume looks like, you gotta check out TopThePodium.com. They did my website. The Sponsored Rider Club podcast website is sponsoredriderclubpodcast.com. That was created by Jeff Vanistall of TopThePodium.com. I think it's awesome. I get a lot of good feedback about it. And there's a number of other websites out there that Jeff has produced that are just phenomenal. So I think it's important in this world of social media where you have control of your content. That's what a website does. It gives you full control. We don't know what Facebook's going to do sometimes. We don't know what Instagram's going to do. We don't know what Twitter's going to do. So if we don't have that central location to direct people and house our content, there is some risk that we incur. So I strongly recommend getting a website, talking to TopThePodium.com. And then the resume, again, is massive. And if you want to stand out, get it done professionally. And honestly, it is one of the best ways to step up your game and present yourself in the best way possible. Family race team. Those are the first words that come to mind when I think of Bold Racing. And the next one is actually axles. Bold Racing is a premier distributor of GSP XTV axles. And if that wasn't cool enough, they just came out with an entirely new axle called the Revolution axle. It is a hollow tube axle. It's really cool. If you head over to their website, gspxtv.com, or you can find out more at boldracingltd.com, you can find out how this new axle technology works. So they are saying to view this as a fuse for your drivetrain. So the hollow tube CV axle twist technology actually increases the strength and reliability of the axle, and it also reduces stress on the drivetrain. Plus, honestly, it's super cool looking, and if people know me, they know that I really like cool looking stuff. So they come in this really cool gold color. Check it out. It's absolutely revolutionary. Safety is our overriding priority. I hear it all the time, but I have to ask myself, is it though? Is that the first thing we think of? Is that the first thing you think of? Over the past couple of years, we've seen the performance of production UTVs increase, somewhere around 350%. That means these machines give us a lot more opportunity to have fun and win races, but it also, unfortunately, gives us new opportunities to crash. And that's why we have partnered with Crash Addict Industries. The owner, Travis Pointer, became very accustomed to crashing early in his career. He saw it as inevitable, and he set out to make the process safer. With a passion for racing, welding, and engineering, Crash Addict Industries now produces full cage and other protection systems intentionally designed to protect you during an accident on the track. They also offer a line of human protection products through their vendors. Do this for me at this point. If you're racing with a stock cage right now, please go check out CrashAddict.com and at least just see what they have to offer. Even if you choose to go with a different company, please make safety your overriding priority. Okay, like I said before the break, lots of good stuff early on, lots of options, but they all come with this caveat that there's a ton of work and there's a lot to overcome. Now, to be a racer and attract and retain sponsors is very difficult. It requires intense training, intense dedication, track time, equipment, lots and lots and lots of effort. And it also comes with a few benefits, though. So one of the things that racers get that the Weekend Warrior doesn't as clearly get is the true abusive testing of the product. Now, you can do a lot as a Weekend Warrior, especially in the backcountry, right? There's only certain ways to prove out some of that product. But as a racer, in an endurance race or, a hardcore, beat the machine up type of race, man, that's a true test of components. So if you're targeting an endemic sponsor, which is someone within the industry, and you are a racer, you are automatically going to get a nice, step up over the Weekend Warrior because of the just pure abuse that you're going to be given your machine. Now, I know there's a couple people right now that are listening. They're like, I beat up my stuff way more than any racer does. That may be true, but you're probably an outlier. Compared to the average Weekend Warrior, the racer's really going to go through more parts and more wear items, and put their stuff through more of a test than the average Weekend Warrior would. But what that really means is that you have to put in more work as a Weekend Warrior to understand how you would pitch something to that type of sponsor, or you don't target them at all. Maybe you target a different type of sponsor. Maybe you go a little bit more non-endemic. So I'll just throw this out there. You'd say it's beef jerky, right? Let's say you are an overlander or you're somebody who does these really long trail rides as a Weekend Warrior. Well, you have to pack certain snacks along with you. You want them to be high protein maybe. You want it to be really easy to pull out. You want it to last, a long time without having to store it in any special way. Great. Why don't you target a jerky company, a beef jerky company, and you've got it in the bag. Versus targeting maybe a custom piston, lightweight piston company. That they're probably going to be looking more towards mod racers. So don't try to compete against that type of, athlete if you are the Weekend Warrior. So you can kind of, select your market a little bit more catered to what your audience might be or who your audience might be and how you can actually prove out the product. If it is that you're, something where you're targeting product specifically. Another element that we just cannot ignore is that racers sometimes benefit from the actual race series promotion or from how the race series is shown to others, whether it's on a live feed or on television. So specifically television, it's difficult for someone even with a strong social media following to replicate screen time on a television program. But that is something that you have to be aware of to go the Weekend Warrior route. You're not going to be able to show TV numbers like maybe a racer is that's on a national televised program, or even a local program. It creates just that extra element of separation between the racer and the Weekend Warrior. And I guess the last piece on that, just from exposure standpoint, is a lot of racers go to an event in which there are other people watching them. So the race series or someone puts on the event, they attend the event, and therefore they automatically get a bunch of eyes on them, whether it's in the pits or on a track or whatever it may be. The Weekend Warrior has to overcome that in other ways, which typically ends up being some sort of strong social media presence or putting on some sort of their own either content platform or their own event. But it's a lot of work to get there. The upside is you might not have to train as hard. So especially if you're like a Jeeper, you're not going to have to train as hard, if at all, potentially to compete in your area of expertise, I guess. Whereas, racer, in order to really get the exposure they need, they got to win. And that takes a ton of effort to get there. So some pros and cons there. And going back to just that training piece, all that hard work that racers put into training, the Weekend Warrior has to supplement that with their content creation. So it doesn't just go away. It's still work. It's just a whole different type of work. I think another thing too that the weekend warrior really needs to overcome is being able to show objectively how they're performing against others. So racing is a competition. You can see which place you come in relation to the other performers. So you can point out like, hey, I got third place. That's a podium finish. And I got a spot on TV and all these other things that are somewhat objective. Like a sponsor can look at you and they could say, okay, you're consistently a third place finisher. This person is consistently a first place finisher. I can get just a similar amount of return on investment by investing in you, as compared to if you were to say, oh well, this person's a 10th place finisher. Maybe the return is still there, but I have a smaller investment to make. So either way, I think that is something that a weekend warrior is not going to be able to easily show. Now, social media stats can help make up for that. You can reference impressions. You can reference if it's podcasts, you can reference downloads. If it's YouTube videos, you can reference views. There's a lot of different ways that you can try to overcome that, but to a certain extent, it is harder to tell in comparison how a weekend warrior is performing against another weekend warrior. Where a racer, you can get some objective evidence around that. All right. There are a few things, in my opinion, too, that you need to get used to if you're going to do this as, the start of a profession, or if you really want to get serious about attracting and retaining sponsors as a weekend warrior or a content creator. For social media, you have to always be on. Now, for racers and stuff, this might not go away, but I think it's just there's an extra element of challenge and a pressure on the weekend warrior to make this happen. But you can do it. People do it all of the time, especially when I reference those models on Instagram. Like, they are all over it. They put a lot of time and effort into it, and sometimes they look silly out in public when they're doing it, but they create really good content that a lot of people want to see and come back later to see again. That means stories, that means feeds, that means videos, whatever it may be. And for content, this is probably the hardest part, and honestly, the same probably goes for racers who are just getting into the social media side or, the content side. It takes a long-term investment. You have to celebrate the little wins, the first view, the first like, the first share, whatever it is. You have to celebrate those little wins because it can take a long time to build a following. And going back to the reference about not being able to objectively tell how you're performing in relation to others, it's kind of like that when it comes to, content creation and being a weekend warrior. When you look at the long-term investment piece, someone who is a racer that's invested a career in it, they can rack up the number of wins they have. They can rack up the number of championships. They can rack up a bunch of sponsors. And if you're the weekend warrior, sometimes you have to look at it slightly differently. Maybe you say, if it's a podcast, you have a certain number of downloads, but you don't know how many downloads other podcasters have. Or you can look at YouTube videos and you can kind of figure it out from what other people have, but it might not be quite as straightforward. Social media gets really complicated. Let's say if you go to Instagram and you see someone with 10,000 followers and another person with 1,000 followers, and you're like, wow, that is pretty objective, right? This person has 10,000 followers and that's 9,000 more than the other. Well, that's great. Why don't you start looking at the engagement percentage? Oh, well, the person with 10,000 followers is getting a 1% engagement. The person with 1,000 followers is getting a 10% engagement. All right, which one is now objectively performing better? It's kind of hard to make these decisions. Whereas if it's a racer, sometimes you can just say, well, this person consistently performs at a high enough level where they're on a podium and therefore they get more exposure, more championships, more proof that the product or whatever it is performing at a higher level. So that is another thing that you kind of got to get used to and figure your way around it. Ultimately, you have to stick in there and you have to celebrate those small wins. You have to keep engaging your audience on a consistent basis. If I could be an example, I've been producing a show every week now for, more than 2 years. And I'm trying to remain consistent so that the audience has some expectation that can be met based off of content delivery schedules. Same goes for many other, platforms out there that the Weekend Warriors use. And the last point that I want to make, things you need to get used to, and this does very much apply to racers too, but to be a successful Weekend Warrior that attracts and retains sponsors, you need to get comfortable and get used to telling your story. The behind the scenes stuff is very critical. You need to figure out how to make people, experience whatever it is you want them to experience. They need to feel the emotions. They need to feel maybe it's entertainment. They need to understand if you're trying to be informative. You need to tell them the story because that is what people remember and that's what they come back for. That's exactly the reason why the beginning of all of my interview shows, which is the massive majority of what I do on this podcast today, is somewhat of an exception. I tell the story from the get-go. I have the guests tell the story because that is what helps build a relationship with an audience, is hearing and understanding what that story is. All right, well, there is a bunch more that I could talk about, but, I think that I hammered these points home. The Weekend Warrior can be a viable sponsorship opportunity. You just need to take a few steps in figuring out what the content is that you're going to create, how you're going to reach your audience consistently, and then how you're going to market that to the potential sponsors. But that's really it. Again, thank you very much for listening to the show. I would love to get your feedback and get some ideas about the different types of renditions of shows I've been doing. Traditionally I do these interview style shows, and I love those very much. But I've been trying to mix in some different perspectives, and especially since I've gained a lot of experience after doing the show, I have a few insights that I can offer. So that's why I'm doing some of these solo shows, here and there. But I really need to know if they're adding value. So, you can shoot me an email, josh@sponsoredriderclubpodcast.com, or you can head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. At this point, though, I just want to point you to that little subscribe button on your podcast player, whether it's iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or whatever it is. Subscribe so you don't miss upcoming guests. And I also just want to ask you to head over to our Facebook page. That's where we do our live shows. Right now, our next one is planning to be February 22nd at 9 p.m. Eastern. Vipe Desai is coming back on. He is a huge marketing expert, and I got a lot of good feedback from when he was on the podcast before. So now we're going to go live. You'll be able to ask some fantastic questions there, and you'll get an answer from Vipe or myself. And then lastly, I need to shout out some of my partners for this show: AMSOIL, TopToPodium.com, Bold Racing and Suspension, SolderWeld, and Crash Addict Industries. And I also want to shout out some of our other partners: MBRP, HMK USA, Studboy Traction, and GSP XTV. I look forward to serving you again next week. Until then, have fun and ride safe.